My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 73 years old, and my own son and his wife came to my house with a truck and stripped it bare, leaving me with nothing. Before I tell you how a single piece of mail they couldn't take would soon destroy their world, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I live in Canton, Ohio. Or at least I used to live. Now it feels like I just exist. My life as I knew it ended on a Tuesday morning. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you get used to when you've been a widow for a long time. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter when I heard it. A deep mechanical roar that rattled the old window panes in my apartment. I looked out and my heart just stopped. A big ugly moving truck was backing into my small driveway, its reverse alarm beeping like a countdown to doom. And then I saw them. My son Kevin got out of the passenger side. He didn't look at the window. He never looks at me anymore when he knows he's done something wrong. Then his wife, Tiffany, stepped out of her own sleek, silver car parked right behind the truck. She took off her designer sunglasses, and even from a distance, I could see the cold, satisfied smile on her face. They weren't here for a visit. They were here on a mission. My hand was shaking so much I could barely turn the doorknob. I opened the door just as two large men in work jumpsuits were coming up the walk. Kevin was standing behind them looking down at his shoes. "Hi, Mom," he mumbled, the words getting lost in the air. Tiffany pushed past him, her expensive perfume filling my small entryway. She didn't hug me. She never does. She just scanned my living room, her eyes darting from one object to the next like a predator sizing up its prey. "All right, let's make this quick," she said, not to me but to the movers. "We'll start with the television." I was floored. I couldn't get a word out. My husband, Robert, had bought me that television with his first bonus from the steel plant 30 years ago. We'd watched so many movies on it, held so many family nights in front of its warm glow. It was more than a TV. It was a part of our history. "Tiffany, wait." I finally managed to say, my voice a weak whisper. "What is this?" "Kevin, what's going on?" Kevin flinched but didn't look up. It was Tiffany who answered, turning to me with a smile that was all teeth. "This will look perfect in our new living room, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're all alone here anyway, right? It's too big for one person." It felt like a punch to the gut. The two movers, without waiting for another word, walked right in, unplugged the television, and began maneuvering it out the door. I was just a statue in my own home, watching strangers carry away my life piece by piece. Next was the refrigerator. Then the solid oak coffee table Robert and I had saved for months to buy. With every item that left, the room felt emptier, colder. My breath caught in my throat. Tiffany was directing the whole operation, pointing at things with a perfectly manicured finger. "Take that. And that. Oh, and the paintings, definitely the paintings." The paintings. The two small oil landscapes Robert had bought on our honeymoon in the Blue Ridge Mountains. They were the first beautiful things we ever owned together. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. "No," I said a little louder this time. "Not the paintings. They were your father's." Kevin finally looked at me then, and his eyes were full of a miserable, weak shame. But it was Tiffany who spoke, stepping between us. She leaned in close, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "Listen, Eleanor. This is for our new house. We're building a future. You don't need this anymore." As the movers carried the last painting out, I overheard her telling Kevin, her voice clear and triumphant in the now empty room. "See? That was easy. This is for our new house. You don't need this anymore." I just stood there, in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my furniture. The faded squares on the wallpaper where the paintings used to hang looked like open wounds. They got everything loaded onto the truck, and as they prepared to leave, I watched my son, my only child, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, walk away without a single look back. As I watched the truck drive away with the last pieces of my life, I thought I had hit rock bottom. But I had no idea that Tiffany's cruelty had only just begun. Before Tiffany, before the truck, before the deafening silence of an empty home, there was Robert. And there was Kevin. My whole world was built on those two names, a foundation I thought was unshakable. Robert was a good man, a strong man who worked at the steel mill his whole life. He had hands that could fix a leaky faucet, a broken engine, or a scraped knee with equal tenderness. His laugh wasn't just a sound. It was a force that could chase the shadows out of any room. He was my rock, my anchor in the choppy waters of life. When the accident happened at the plant, when that shrill, piercing call came in the middle of the night, my world didn't just crack. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Kevin was only 15, standing on that terrifying edge between boyhood and manhood. He tried so hard to be brave for me, puffing out his chest and clenching his jaw, but at night I could hear him crying softly in his room. His grief was a raw, silent thing that filled our small house. I remember holding him in the cramped hallway, the scent of industrial grease and Old Spice still clinging to his father's jacket hanging by the door. It was all I had left of him. In that moment I made a promise to Robert, a silent vow whispered into the darkness of our broken home. I would move heaven and earth, I would walk through fire to make sure his boy, our boy, had the future he deserved. My own life no longer mattered. It was now just a vehicle for his. And so I worked. I was already doing 2 shifts at the textile mill. A job that paid the bills but ate away at my body. The constant, deafening clatter of the looms became the soundtrack to my life. I'd come home smelling of machine oil and bleach, my bones aching with a weariness that went deeper than muscle, a fatigue that settled in my soul. But that wasn't enough. Not for the future I dreamed of for Kevin. He had his father's intelligence, a sharp mind that deserved more than a life in the mills. So, after my shifts, after I made sure Kevin had a hot meal and his homework was done, I would pull out my old Singer sewing machine. The small buzzing motor became my only companion in the lonely hours after midnight. I became the neighborhood seamstress. I mended the torn jeans of boys who played too hard, hemmed the Sunday dresses for the church choir, and sewed curtains for new brides full of dreams. I once stayed up for 3 straight nights to finish a wedding dress for a girl whose mother had passed away. When she saw it, she cried, and for a moment the exhaustion vanished. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Most nights I just doze off for an hour or 2, my head resting on my arms at the sewing table, waking up with the pattern of the fabric imprinted on my cheek and pins still stuck in the cuff of my sleeve. Every dollar I made, every single cent, went into a chipped ceramic tin box I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in my closet. That was Kevin's college fund. It grew slowly, painfully, dollar by crumpled dollar. He was a smart boy, a brilliant boy. He had a mind for business, and he dreamed of going to a university with a top-tier program, a place that seemed as distant as the moon from our small town in Ohio. When he got his acceptance letter, his shout of pure joy echoed through our little house. He lifted me off the ground and spun me around in the kitchen, his face alight with a future so bright it almost blinded me. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, tears of joy and gut-wrenching fear. When I saw the tuition costs, a cold dread washed over me. My tin box, my years of sleepless nights wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. I didn't tell him. I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see that brilliant light in his eyes dim. So I did the only thing I could think of. The next morning, I called a realtor. I put our little house, the one Robert and I had bought with our life savings, the one where every wall held a memory, up for sale. It sold in less than a month. I took the money, walked into the bank with a heart that felt both heavy as lead and light as a feather, and paid his first 2 years of tuition in full. The rest I used as a deposit on the small 2-bedroom apartment where this story began. When Kevin asked why we were moving, his brow furrowed with confusion, I just smiled, a bright, brittle thing. "It's time for a change, honey. A new start for us," I said, my voice breezy and confident. He was so caught up in the excitement of buying textbooks and meeting his roommate that he didn't question it. He never knew. He never knew that the foundation of his prestigious education was built on the sale of the only home he'd ever known. To me, it wasn't a sacrifice. It was simply what a mother does. It was an investment in his future, my last greatest gift from his father. I watched him walk across that graduation stage, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it physically hurt. He was going to have a life his father could only have dreamed of. A life with a respectable salary and a corner office. I gave him my entire world, believing that one day, he would be the one to take care of me. How tragically wrong I was. The moment he brought Tiffany home, I knew I had lost him forever. Kevin landed a great job right out of college, a management position with a promising salary at a major logistics company in Columbus. For the first year, things were what I had always dreamed of. He was driven, successful, and he never forgot his old mom. He'd visit every Sunday, his car full of groceries he insisted on buying, and we'd sit for hours at my little kitchen table while he told me about his projects and the challenges at work. He was my proudest achievement, the living, breathing embodiment of all my hopes. Then he met Tiffany at a corporate event. The first time he brought her to my apartment for dinner, I was a bundle of nerves. I spent 2 whole days cleaning every nook and cranny, and I baked my famous apple pie from scratch, the one Robert used to say was the best in the whole state. I wanted everything to be perfect. She walked in, and the first thing I noticed was her eyes. They weren't unkind, not overtly. They were assessing, like an appraiser calculating the value of everything in the room, and finding it all wanting. She glided through my home, her heels clicking softly on the worn linoleum, her gaze lingering for a moment too long on the faded floral wallpaper, the slightly chipped teacups, the worn armchair where Robert used to sit. "This is a cozy little place," she said, her voice as smooth as polished glass. I knew with a sinking feeling in my stomach that it wasn't a compliment. It was a judgment. "Oh, is that an antique?" she asked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Robert's chair. "So vintage." The word hung in the air, meaning old and worthless. Throughout dinner, she was a master of the backhanded compliment, a verbal artist of passive aggression. My pot roast, a recipe passed down from my own mother, was surprisingly good for such simple ingredients. My apartment was brave for using such classic wallpaper. It was exhausting trying to keep up with the subtle insults, all delivered with a dazzling empty smile. When I brought out the apple pie, the pie I had poured my heart and memories into, she waved a dismissive hand, the large diamond on her finger catching the light. "Oh, no thank you, Eleanor. I'm gluten-free," she announced, looking at my golden-crusted creation as if it were a plate of poison. "Besides, all that sugar is terrible for your complexion." I watched Kevin's face. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, "Mom's pie is the best, you have to try it." He just gave a weak, apologetic chuckle. I could see a faint blush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He was ashamed. Ashamed of me, of my simple food, of the home I had made for us. In that moment, watching him squirm under her cool gaze, I felt a chasm open between my son and me. From that day on, something shifted. The serpent was in the garden, and I could feel her whispers even when she wasn't there. His Sunday visits became every other Sunday, then once a month, always with a flimsy excuse. His phone calls grew shorter, more perfunctory. "Sorry, Mom, gotta run. Tiffany and I have plans to go to a gallery opening." Or Tiffany booked us a weekend at a spa. It was always Tiffany. When I did see him, she was always there. A permanent fixture on his arm, her hand possessively stroking his bicep. She would skillfully steer the conversation away from our shared past, from the funny stories about his childhood or memories of his father, and towards their bright, shiny future. The promotion he was aiming for, the upscale neighborhood they were looking at, the European vacation they were planning. She started planting seeds of poison, little comments dropped into conversation with surgical precision, always when Kevin was listening. "Kevin works so hard," she'd say, looking at me pointedly. "He really needs to focus on his career, not be weighed down by old obligations." The words were aimed at me, a clear message that I was a liability, a relic from a past he needed to shed. Once I overheard her talking to him on the phone. I was in the bathroom and they thought I couldn't hear. "She's just so dependent on you, honey," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "A mother's love is about letting go, not holding on so tight with guilt. You need to build your own life, our life." Her words were working. I could feel Kevin pulling away, building a wall between us brick by brick, a wall designed by Tiffany. His hugs became brief, obligatory pats on the back. His smiles were strained, never quite reaching his eyes. He was still my son, the boy whose face I knew better than my own, but he was no longer my Kevin. He was Tiffany's Kevin now, a polished, successful stranger. I felt a profound loneliness settle over me, a chilling premonition of the isolation to come. I tried to hold on, to remind him of who we were, but I was fighting a battle against a subtle, smiling enemy I had already lost. Her whispers were like poison, slowly turning my son against me. But her quiet manipulations were nothing compared to the direct attack that was coming next. For years, my one constant source of pride, and a vital part of my modest income, was my craft. In Canton, I'm known for my quilting. It's not just a hobby, it's an art form passed down from my grandmother. Every year, the First Community Church holds a large charity auction to raise money for the town's food pantry and the homeless shelter. It's the biggest event of the year. And the centerpiece, the item that always brings in the biggest bids, is a handcrafted quilt made by me. It takes me 3 months of meticulous, painstaking work, from designing the pattern to the final stitch. The church pays me a stipend for it, a respectable sum that I relied on to cover my property taxes and utilities for the year. It wasn't a huge salary, but it was mine. It was earned with my own 2 hands. It was my dignity. Tiffany knew how much that quilt meant to me. Kevin must have told her about it, probably in a moment of nostalgic pride before she had fully sunk her claws into him. She knew it was more than money. It was my connection to the community, my mark on the world, a symbol of my value beyond just being Kevin's mom. And she decided with cold, calculated precision to take it from me. About a month before the auction, when I was putting the final borders on the most intricate quilt I had ever made, a tree of life pattern with hundreds of tiny, colorful leaves, I got a call from Pastor John. He's a kind, gentle man who had baptized Kevin and had delivered a beautiful eulogy at Robert's funeral. His voice on the phone was full of a sad, awkward sympathy that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Eleanor," he began, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I had a call this morning from a very concerned friend of the family." My blood ran cold. I gripped the receiver, my knuckles turning white. I knew instantly who it was. It had to be Tiffany. She told me. "Well, she said that your health has been failing lately," he continued, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "She mentioned your eyesight is getting blurry from all the close work, and that your hands have started to tremble quite badly. She was so worried that you were pushing yourself too hard to finish the quilt on time." The lies were so specific, so cruel, they took my breath away. She had woven a web of deceit that was impossible to untangle with a simple denial. My hands were stiff from arthritis, yes, especially in the cold Ohio mornings, but they were as steady as a surgeon's when I held a needle. My eyesight was fine. I had new glasses just last year. "Pastor John, that's not true at all," I stammered, my mind reeling. "I'm perfectly fine. The quilt is almost finished. It's one of my best." He sighed, a heavy, tired sound that told me I was too late. "Eleanor, I believe you. Of course I do. But you're your friend." She was very convincing. Very concerned. She even suggested another seamstress, a very talented woman who is a friend of hers, who could step in and finish the last few details. She framed it as a way to help you, to ensure you wouldn't lose the stipend entirely while allowing you to rest. She said she just wanted to make sure the auction was a success, and that you were taken care of. The cunning of it was breathtaking. It was a hostile takeover disguised as an act of charity. She had presented herself as a savior, a concerned daughter-in-law looking out for my well-being, while simultaneously assassinating my reputation and sabotaging my livelihood. She had made it impossible for the church committee to refuse her generous offer without looking heartless. They had already voted. They had already contacted the other woman. They were taking the quilt away from me. "I am so sorry, Eleanor," Pastor John said, his voice full of genuine regret. "Please just get some rest. We're all praying for your health to improve." When I hung up the phone, it felt as heavy as a brick. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had worked tirelessly for over 30 years to provide for my son. They were steady, not a tremor in sight. She hadn't just lied, she had tried to erase me. She had painted me as a frail, incompetent old woman, a relic no longer capable. And my own community, the people I had known my whole life, had believed her. She had taken away my purpose, my income, and my good name in one fell swoop. Can you imagine the humiliation? My own daughter-in-law sabotaging my livelihood, turning my own friends against me with poisonous lies. I felt so alone, so utterly powerless. But Tiffany wasn't done trying to break me. I sat in my armchair for hours, the unfinished quilt lying across my lap like a beautiful, useless shroud. The intricate patterns I had designed with such love now seemed to mock me. She had taken my income and my pride. Now she was coming back for my memories. The phone call that sealed my fate came a few weeks later. It was Kevin. His voice had that rehearsed, unnatural quality it always got whenever Tiffany had been coaching him. He was like a puppet, and I could almost hear her pulling the strings. "Hey, Mom," he said, his cheerfulness painfully forced. "So Tiffany and I have some amazing news. We closed on a house. A real house with a yard and everything. The promotion I got last year really helped with the down payment." I tried to inject some warmth into my voice, a warmth I no longer felt. "That's wonderful, sweetie. I'm happy for you." "Yeah, it is. But, starting out is tough. We're a bit stretched thin. We need a little help getting it furnished." There was a long, awkward pause. I could hear the faint, insistent murmur of Tiffany whispering in the background, feeding him his lines. "So we were thinking, you have so much stuff in your small apartment. Things you probably don't even use anymore. It just seems like a waste." My heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I knew where this was going. This was the final assault. "Like that big TV," he continued, the words rushing out in a nervous torrent. "It's way too big for one person. And your refrigerator is huge, we could really use it. And Dad's paintings. Tiffany thinks they would look just perfect in our new dining room. It would be like keeping a piece of Dad in the family." The audacity of using his father's memory as a tool for extortion sent a wave of nausea through my stomach. He was leveraging my love for his father to strip me of the last precious pieces of him I had left. "Kevin, no," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. "You can't. Those are the only things I have left of your father. They are memories. They're not just stuff." He sighed, a long, impatient sound that cut me deeper than any shout could have. It was the sigh of a man burdened by his inconvenient mother. I heard more whispering, more urgent coaching from Tiffany, and then Kevin's voice turned cold, detached, almost robotic. "Mom, don't be selfish. You've already lived your life. You had your turn. It's our turn now." Those were her words. He was just the mouthpiece for her greed. I knew then that there was no point in fighting. He was gone, replaced by this cold, selfish stranger. "All right, Kevin," I whispered, the fight draining out of me completely. "You can take them." A few days later, the truck arrived. The day was a blur of motion and quiet horror. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching as my life was dismantled. But one moment is seared into my memory forever. A perfect little vignette of Tiffany's casual cruelty. As the movers were carrying out the last of my furniture, my small bookshelf, Tiffany accidentally knocked a small cedar box off the top shelf. It wasn't just any box. It was a box of old family photos I kept there, photos that weren't in albums. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack of breaking glass and splintering wood. Dozens of faded, precious photos scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. A picture of me and Robert on our wedding day, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist, both of us so young and full of hope. A photo of a 5-year-old Kevin with a chocolate-smeared smile, sitting proudly on his father's shoulders at a county fair. A picture of the three of us on the porch of the house I sold for his education. Tiffany looked down at the mess, the shattered fragments of my past. Then she looked directly at me. A tiny, cruel smirk played on her lips. "Oops," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of an apology, utterly devoid of any real regret. "I guess some old memories are just too fragile to keep." She didn't bend down to help. She didn't offer a single word of genuine sympathy. She just stepped over the shattered pieces of my past, her expensive heel grinding a crack across a photo of my husband, and walked out the door. Kevin followed her, his head down, carefully stepping around the picture of him and his father as if it were a piece of trash he didn't want to get on his shoes. They took everything that had a price tag and shattered everything that was priceless. As darkness fell in my empty, silent apartment, I sank to the floor, my hands trembling as I tried to gather the broken memories. I truly believed my life was over. I had no idea a ghost from my past was about to walk back into my life. The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell, a quiet, grinding despair. The silence in my apartment was a physical presence. It was heavy, suffocating, pressing in on me from the bare walls. At night, every creak of the old building, every distant siren, sounded terrifyingly loud in the void left by my television. The faded squares on the wallpaper where the paintings used to hang felt like accusing eyes, constantly reminding me of what I had lost. I had entered a gray, featureless landscape of loneliness. Without a refrigerator, Life became a daily struggle for survival. I had to buy food every single day, small sad portions for one that wouldn't spoil. I'd walk to the corner store with my little cart, feeling the pitying glances of neighbors who had seen the moving truck. My meager savings from the few sewing jobs I could still get were dwindling at an alarming rate. Some nights I just have a piece of toast for dinner. The gnawing hunger in my stomach a constant dull ache. My neighbor, a kind widow named Mrs. Gable, must have noticed my decline. She started showing up at my door with little offerings, always with a gentle lie. A bowl of steaming chicken soup. I just made way too much for one person. A few thick slices of meatloaf. My son brought this over and I can't possibly eat it all. I knew she was just trying to help, but every bite I took was seasoned with shame. I had become a charity case. The woman who had sold her own home to ensure her son would never go without was now depending on a neighbor's leftovers to eat. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and more invisible with each passing day. I was at my lowest point, sitting in the dark because it felt less empty than turning on a light, when the letter arrived. It was pushed through the mail slot and landed softly on the floor. It was in a thick cream-colored envelope, my name and address written in elegant, unfamiliar cursive. The return address was for a prestigious-looking lawyer in Columbus. My first thought was sheer panic. Debt collectors? An eviction notice from the landlord? My hands trembled as I tore it open, expecting the worst. Inside there was a formal typed letter from the law firm, but tucked behind it was a handwritten note on beautiful heavy stationery. My eyes scanned the page, trying to make sense of the words, and then I saw the signature at the bottom. Arthur Pendleton. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. A name I hadn't said or even thought in over 50 years. Arthur was my high school sweetheart. My first love. The boy I danced with at prom. The one I shared secret dreams with under the stars. We had planned a future together. A simple, happy life. But his family moved away the summer after graduation when he went off to a big engineering college, and back then long distance was a world away. Life pulled us apart. I met the love of my life, Robert. He, I had heard through the grapevine decades ago, had married a doctor and become a successful architect. Now his words were right here in my hands, a voice from a life I had almost forgotten I'd lived. He wrote that his wife, a wonderful woman he had loved dearly, had passed away from cancer 2 years ago. After her passing, he had sold his firm, retired, and decided to move back to a quiet town in Ohio, not far from Canton, to be closer to the woods and lakes he'd loved as a boy. And this is the part that still gives me chills, the part that feels like fate. He wrote, I was feeling nostalgic one afternoon and found myself reading through old online archives of the Canton local newspaper, just to see what had become of my old hometown. I came across a small human interest article from about 10 years ago about the annual church festival. It mentioned the prize-winning baked goods from the church's bake sale, and it listed one of the main contributors. Her name was Eleanor Vance. He said seeing my name, my maiden name still attached to the memory of the woman he knew, was like a sign he couldn't ignore. He said he had to know what had become of the girl with the brilliant smile and the kind heart. So he hired a private investigator through his lawyer to find me. He was careful to explain he didn't want to intrude if I was married or had a different life. He just wanted to know if I was okay. The investigator found my address in less than a day. Eleanor. The letter ended, his elegant script blurring through my tears. I know 50 years is a lifetime. More than a lifetime. But not a year has gone by that I haven't thought of you and wondered what if. I'm not trying to recapture the past, but I would be honored if you would allow me to be part of your present. If you are single, and if you have even the slightest curiosity to see what has become of the boy who never forgot you, please call my lawyer. I would be honored to just have a cup of coffee with you and hear about your life. My hands were shaking as I held the letter. After 50 years of silence, a voice from my past was calling out to me in my darkest hour. Could this be real? Or was it just another cruel joke from fate? I knew I had to make a choice. For 2 whole days, Arthur's letter sat on my bare kitchen counter, the single most beautiful and terrifying object in my empty apartment. I'd pick it up, my fingers tracing his elegant handwriting, read it until I had memorized every word, and then put it back down again. Hope is a terrifying thing when you haven't felt it in a long, long time. It makes you vulnerable. It opens you up to the possibility of more pain. What if he saw me now? This 73-year-old woman with deep-set wrinkles, graying hair and hands worn out by work and worry. What would he see? Would he see even a glimmer of the girl he remembered? Or just a sad, broken-down old lady who was a shadow of her former self? The thought of his potential disappointment was a cold knot in my stomach. On the third day, I was eating a piece of dry toast Mrs. Gable had given me, and I looked around my empty apartment. I saw the faded rectangles on the walls, the vacant corner where my TV used to be. I had absolutely nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, I had something to gain. I put on my best cardigan, walked the 6 blocks to the public library, my hands clutching the letter like a lifeline, and used their phone to make the call. My voice was a shaky whisper when I told the lawyer's secretary who I was, my heart hammering against my ribs. She put me on hold for just a moment, and then a man with a warm professional voice came on the line. It was the lawyer himself, Mr. Davison. Mrs. Vance, he said, and I could hear a genuine smile in his voice. Arthur is going to be absolutely thrilled. He's been hoping you would call every single day. The next day, a courier in a crisp uniform delivered another package from the law firm. Inside was a formal invitation to dinner at the Vintners Club, the fanciest, most exclusive restaurant in Columbus, for the following Saturday night. Tucked inside the invitation was a check from a bank I'd only seen in movies. It was made out to me, Eleanor Vance, for $1,000. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. A little note was attached, written on the same heavy stationery, in Arthur's handwriting. It said, "Please, Eleanor, allow me this small gesture. I have a vivid memory of a girl in a beautiful blue dress at our senior prom. For 50 years that image has stayed with me. I want you to buy yourself a dress that makes you feel like the queen you always were." I sank into my chair and cried. Not from sadness but from the overwhelming shock of being seen, of being valued, of being treated with a kindness so profound it felt like a foreign language. That Saturday I took a bus to the city, feeling like an imposter. I walked into a boutique, a place with sparkling chandeliers and plush carpets, a place I would never have dared to enter before. The young saleswoman looked me up and down, a flicker of polite dismissal in her eyes. But I held my head high, the check tucked safely in my purse. "I need a dress," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "For a very special evening." Her attitude changed when she realized I was a serious customer. She brought me dozens of dresses. I finally chose one the color of a peacock's feather, a deep shimmering teal that brought out the little bit of blue left in my graying eyes. It was made of silk and it flowed around me, making me feel graceful. I bought elegant, low-heeled shoes, a small clutch, and then I did something truly daring. I went to a real salon for the first time in my life. A young woman with bright pink hair washed and styled my thin gray hair into soft waves. She insisted on adding just a touch of makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She wasn't young, but she looked elegant, dignified, worthy. At 7 o'clock sharp, a black Lincoln Town car, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up in front of my shabby apartment building. The driver, a tall man in a crisp suit, opened the door for me with a respectful nod. Mrs. Gable was watching from her window, her jaw practically on the floor. As I settled into the plush leather seat, I felt like Cinderella going to the ball. Arthur was waiting for me at a private, candlelit table in the restaurant. He stood up when he saw me. He was older, of course, his hair a distinguished silver, but his eyes were exactly the same. Kind, warm, and smiling with a genuine joy that made my heart ache. He didn't see a 73-year-old woman in a new dress. He saw me. "Eleanor," he breathed, taking both my hands in his. His were warm and strong. "You are even more beautiful than you were in my memories." We talked for hours. It was effortless, as if the 50 years between us had been nothing more than a brief interruption. We talked about our lives, our spouses we had loved and lost, our children, our secret dreams and our quiet regrets. He was a good man, a truly good man, full of wisdom and a gentle humor. As the evening was ending, as the waiter cleared our dessert plates, he reached across the table and took my hand. He looked at me, his eyes sincere and full of a hope that mirrored my own. "Eleanor, my house is big and my heart is empty. I've waited 50 years for a second chance. I don't want to waste another minute. Will you come live with me?" How could I possibly answer that? I stared at him across the candlelit table, his question hanging in the air between us. Live with him? The idea was insane. A fantasy ripped from the pages of a romance novel. We had just reconnected after half a century. We were practically strangers, bound only by the faded memory of a teenage romance. My logical mind, the one that had navigated decades of hardship and practicality, screamed that this was reckless. But as I looked into his eyes, I didn't see recklessness. I saw home. I saw a kindness and a respect I thought had vanished from the world forever. A long, gray, lonely life stretched out behind me, and here, a hand was reaching out from the past to pull me into a future I never dared to imagine. Yes, I whispered, the word feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue, a word I hadn't said for myself in a very long time. Yes, Arthur. I will. His smile was like the sunrise after a long, dark night. It lit up his entire face and made my own heart feel warm for the first time in years. The next few days were a whirlwind, a dream I was afraid I'd wake up from. Arthur arranged for a professional moving service, not a hulking, impersonal truck like the one Kevin had used, but two polite young men in a clean van who handled my few possessions with care. There wasn't much to pack. My clothes, my faithful old sewing machine, my box of shattered photos which I had painstakingly tried to piece back together. The men were gentle, wrapping each meager item in soft blankets, as if it were a priceless treasure. Watching them, I felt a chapter of my life, the chapter of struggle and invisibility, finally closing. Arthur took me to his house. It wasn't a house, it was an estate. A beautiful stone manor set on acres of rolling green land, with a sprawling garden that sloped down to a sparkling private lake. It was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in magazines, a world away from my cramped apartment and the clatter of the textile mill. "This is our home now, Eleanor," he said, squeezing my hand as we stood in the grand entryway with its soaring ceiling and gleaming hardwood floors. He led me upstairs, not to his room, but to a beautiful suite of rooms at the opposite end of the hall. There was a spacious bedroom with a four-poster bed, a cozy sitting area with a fireplace, and a private balcony that overlooked the magnificent gardens. "This is your space, Eleanor," he said gently, his eyes full of understanding. "I want you to feel safe and comfortable above all else. My room is just down the hall. I will wait as long as it takes for you to be ready. A day, a year, forever. It doesn't matter." His respect for me, his patience, was the greatest gift he could have given me. After a lifetime of giving, of sacrificing, of my needs always coming last, here was a man who asked for nothing but my company and my comfort. I burst into tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, cleansing relief. Life became a gentle, beautiful dream. Arthur bought me a whole new wardrobe, filled with soft cashmere sweaters and comfortable, elegant dresses. We took long, slow walks by the lake every morning, our hands intertwined. We sat by the fire in the evenings in his vast library, surrounded by thousands of books, reading in companionable silence or talking for hours about everything and nothing. He learned that I loved to garden, a passion I hadn't been able to indulge in my small apartment. The very next day, he had his groundskeeper till and prepare a large, sunny section of his pristine English garden just for me. He told me to plant whatever I wanted. My hands, once calloused and sore from mending other people's clothes, were now happily covered in rich soil as I planted roses, lavender, and hydrangeas. I was cultivating beauty again. He loved my cooking. My simple ingredients became exquisite meals in his magnificent, state-of-the-art kitchen. He would sit at the huge marble island and watch me, a look of pure contentment on his face, as I kneaded dough or stirred a simmering pot of soup. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just a mother, a widow, a seamstress. I was Eleanor, a woman who was interesting, a woman who was capable, a woman who was loved. It felt like a fairy tale, a life I didn't deserve. But as we all know, every good story needs a final confrontation. The past has a way of catching up with you. And mine was coming sooner than I expected. One bright morning, about a month after I had moved in, we were having coffee and scones on the terrace overlooking the lake. The sun was warm on my face, and the scent of my new roses filled the air. My phone, a new smartphone Arthur had bought me and patiently taught me how to use, rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. My old life had taught me that unexpected calls rarely brought good news. But something, a strange premonition, told me I had to. I answered the phone and a desperate, broken voice on the other end screamed, "Mom? Mom, where are you?" I went to the apartment and it's empty. It was Kevin. The sound of his voice, high-pitched and laced with a raw panic I hadn't heard since he was a little boy who'd woken from a nightmare, sent a jolt through me. But it wasn't the old familiar jolt of a mother's instinctual worry. It was something different, colder, more detached. It was the jolt of a past I thought I had left behind suddenly appearing in my rearview mirror. Arthur saw the immediate change in my expression and placed his warm, steadying hand over mine on the table. It was a small gesture, but it grounded me. I took a deep breath, the scent of roses and fresh coffee filling my lungs, and I looked out at the peaceful lake. I was no longer in that empty, silent apartment. I was safe. I was strong. "I'm fine, Kevin," I said, my own voice calm even. It was the voice of a woman who was no longer a victim. A woman who was no longer his to break. "I'm home." There was a confused silence on the other end of the line, punctuated by his ragged breathing. "Home? But the apartment is empty. I talked to the landlord. He said you moved out weeks ago, left no forwarding address. I thought something terrible had happened. Where are you? What's going on?" His panic was now mixed with an accusatory tone, as if my disappearance was an inconvenience designed specifically to upset him. "A lot has happened, Kevin," I said simply, refusing to offer him the long, detailed explanation he clearly expected. Then it all came tumbling out of him. A torrent of misery, self-pity, and blame. "Mom, it's Tiffany. She left me," he sobbed, the sound ugly and raw over the phone. "She was having an affair with my boss, can you believe it? The whole time. The company went bankrupt, I lost my job, and she cleaned me out. She took everything." "Everything?" I asked, my voice still even, a cold, clinical curiosity replacing any sympathy I might have felt. "Everything," he wailed. "All of our savings, the joint account is empty. She sold the furniture, took the car, even the paintings, Mom. She took the paintings, your paintings. She just packed up and left with him while I was at a fake job interview he set up. I have nothing. No job, no money. The bank is foreclosing on the house. There was a divorce lawyer's card on the empty mantelpiece. I came to you. I came to the apartment because I had nowhere else to go. You're all I have left. Please, Mom, can I come home? Can I come home?" The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid in my mouth. He had stood by, a silent coward, while his wife dismantled my home, my life, and my spirit. And now that his own curated, perfect world had fallen apart, he wanted to come back to the home he had helped destroy, expecting me to be there, waiting with open arms to pick up the pieces. I looked across the table at Arthur, at his kind, steady eyes. I looked at the beautiful garden I was planting, at the peaceful lake, at the new life I was carefully, lovingly building for myself. A life free of obligation and guilt. A life that was mine. "Kevin," I said, and the strength in my own voice surprised me. It was a strength forged in fire and loneliness. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you and Tiffany did to me was cruel and unforgiving. You broke my heart in a way I didn't think was possible. But you are my son, and in my own way, I forgive you." A sound of immense relief, a choked sob, came from his end. "Oh, thank you, Mom. Thank you. I knew you would. So I can." "But," I interrupted, my voice sharp and firm, cutting him off. "Forgiveness does not mean forgetfulness. And it does not mean that things go back to the way they were. Home is no longer your safety net to fall back on whenever your life falls apart. I am no longer the person whose own happiness can be sacrificed for yours. I have a new life now, Kevin. A life where I am cherished and respected and happy." The silence on his end was deafening. It was the sound of his entire world, his entire understanding of me being turned upside down. I could practically hear his mind trying to process this new reality. The mother who had always been there, the endless well of support he could always draw from without a thought, had finally officially run dry. I don't understand," he stammered, his voice small and lost. "A new life? With who?" "With a good man who values me," I said, my gaze meeting Arthur's. "Now, I am going to give you an address. You can come visit, but on my terms. Not as a son running home to his mother for a bailout, but as a man who has a lot of amends to make." I gave him Arthur's address, and then, before he could argue or plead, I hung up the phone. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt free. 2 days later, a beaten-down man I barely recognized showed up at our gate. Arthur answered the door. I watched from the archway of the living room as Kevin stood on the grand stone porch, his shoulders slumped, his eyes wide and blinking as he took in the sheer scale of the place. He was driving a battered old sedan that looked like it had been through a war, a far cry from the new truck he'd been so proud of when he'd come to empty my apartment. He looked small, lost, and utterly out of his depth. "You must be Kevin," Arthur said, his voice polite but imbued with a quiet firmness that left no room for negotiation. He didn't offer to shake his hand. He just stepped aside. "Eleanor is in the sunroom." Arthur's presence was a silent declaration. "You are not on your own turf anymore. You are a guest here, and you will behave." I watched Kevin walk through the grand hallway as if in a trance. His eyes darted from the high vaulted ceilings to the beautiful original artwork on the walls, to the magnificent arrangements of fresh flowers on every table that Arthur had delivered weekly because he knew they made me smile. This wasn't just a nice house. It was a different world. A different reality from the one he had tried to condemn me to. A world he had no place in. When he saw me, he stopped dead. I was sitting in a comfortable wicker armchair by a large window, the afternoon sun streaming in. I was wearing a simple but elegant cashmere sweater set Arthur had bought me. I wasn't the broken, weeping woman in a threadbare apron he had left behind in an empty, dark apartment. I was the mistress of this magnificent, light-filled house. And he knew it. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. "Mom," he whispered, the words sounding hollow and foreign. "You look incredible." "Thank you, Kevin," I replied, my voice calm and even. I gestured to the sofa opposite me. "Please sit down." He perched awkwardly on the edge of an expensive cream-colored sofa, looking as comfortable as a stray cat in a lion's den. He launched into another round of apologies, but this time they were different. They weren't the panicked, self-pitying sobs from the phone call. These were the broken, shame-faced words of a man who was finally, truly seeing the consequences of his actions. Tears streamed down his face as he told me how Tiffany had manipulated him, how she had twisted his love for me into a weakness, how she had convinced him that my needs were an obstacle to his happiness. He admitted he had been a fool, a coward, a terrible son. I listened without interrupting, my face a neutral mask. I had to hear him say it. When he was finished, his voice raw from crying, he looked at me with the desperate eyes of a child who knows he has done wrong. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't deserve anything from you. But please, Mom, just let me stay for a little while. I'll sleep on the floor. I'll do anything. Just until I can get back on my feet." Before I could form a reply, Arthur, who had been standing quietly by the doorway, a silent, supportive presence, spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried an authority that Kevin had never heard before. "Kevin," he said, stepping into the room, "your mother has spent her entire life getting others back on their feet. She has carried the weight of this family alone for decades. Her time doing that is over. Her happiness, her peace is my priority now." Kevin looked from Arthur's resolute face to my calm one, and I could see the final, devastating understanding dawn in his eyes. He had not just lost his house and his wife. He had lost his mother. Not through death but through his own choices. He had traded unconditional love for a woman's toxic ambition, and now he had neither. He had no one left to fight his battles, no one left to clean up his messes. "I understand," he finally choked out, his head bowed in defeat. "You're right. She deserves to be happy." Arthur was a better, more generous man than me. He didn't throw Kevin out into the street. He told him he would connect him with a friend who ran a construction business and could offer him a steady job doing honest, hard labor. He gave him the number of a realtor who managed modest, affordable apartments on the other side of town. "It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet, son," Arthur said, the word son carrying a weight of expectation, not affection. "But you will respect the new life your mother has built. You will call before you visit. And you will never, ever take her for granted again." Kevin nodded, too broken to argue. He left that day a different man. 6 months later, Arthur and I were married. It was a small, beautiful ceremony in our garden, surrounded by the roses I had planted. Kevin was there. He was thinner, his hands were callous from real work, but he looked clearer. The weakness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet, somber maturity. He came to me after the ceremony, his eyes sincere. "I'm so happy for you, Mom," he said. And for the first time in years I knew he meant it. My life had come full circle. I had lost everything only to gain a world I never dreamed of. But the story doesn't end there. What we did next is what I'm most proud of. 5 years have passed since our wedding day. 5 years of waking up every morning next to a man who starts my day not with demands or expectations, but by bringing me a cup of coffee and telling me he loves me. 5 years of profound, quiet, and uninterrupted peace. Arthur and I have traveled. We've seen the canals of Venice and the majestic mountains of Switzerland. He has shown me a world I only ever read about in books. But the most important journey we took was the one that led us to create something meaningful, something that would last long after we were gone. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman I had been, alone, invisible, starving, and ashamed to accept a bowl of soup from a kind neighbor. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that there were thousands of other women just like me. Women who had given their entire lives to their families, who had been the unpaid chefs, nurses, therapists, and cheerleaders, only to be cast aside when they were no longer considered useful. Women who were facing a lonely old age with nothing to show for a lifetime of sacrifice. So, with Arthur's enthusiastic support and a significant portion of his estate, we started the Eleanor Vance Foundation. It's a non-profit organization dedicated to helping elderly women who have been abandoned or are facing financial hardship due to family betrayal, divorce, or widowhood. We provide them with safe, beautiful housing, expert legal assistance to help them fight for their rights in cases of unfair inheritance disputes, and most importantly, a community that reminds them of their immense worth. We wanted to build a legacy of hope. Our first call was to Pastor John. I sat down with him in his office, Arthur by my side, and I told him the entire story, from Tiffany's lies about the quilt to the truth of my new life. The poor man was mortified, his face turning pale as he realized how he had been manipulated. But his shame quickly turned into a righteous determination. He became one of our most passionate board members, his deep connections within the community helping us find the women who needed our help the most. I'll never forget one of our first clients, a sweet woman named Mary. She was 80 years old. After her husband died, her children had convinced her to sign over power of attorney, put her in a grim, understaffed nursing home against her will, and were in the process of selling off her assets to fund their own lavish lifestyles. She was heartbroken, convinced her life was over, just waiting to die. Our lawyers, the best Arthur could find, stepped in with the force of a hurricane. We found that her children had acted illegally, through coercion and elder fraud. We not only stopped the sale of her house, but we helped her regain control of her finances. We got her out of that home and into one of our beautiful independent living cottages, surrounded by gardens and friends. I visit her often. Last week, she showed me the prize-winning tomatoes she grew in her little garden patch. "Eleanor," she told me, her eyes shining with a light I recognized, "you didn't just give me a home. You gave me back myself." As for the others, life, I've found, has a way of delivering its own perfect justice. We heard through the town grapevine that Tiffany's affair with Kevin's boss ended spectacularly. He, a man who cheated on his own wife, was never going to be faithful. He left her for an even younger woman, and Tiffany, who had never learned to manage money, only to spend it, lost everything in a series of bad investments. She now works as a secretary, living in a small apartment not unlike the one she once mocked me for. Karma, it seems, has a long and impeccable memory. Kevin is doing well. He works hard at his construction job. He has a new girlfriend, a quiet, kind schoolteacher who treats me with a genuine warmth and respect that still brings tears to my eyes. He visits once a month, always respectful, always grateful. He is finally the man his father would have been proud of. He is rebuilding his life one honest day's work at a time. Yesterday was my 78th birthday. Arthur threw a surprise party for me in the garden. Kevin was there with his girlfriend. Mrs. Gable came, her eyes wide with wonder at my new life. And all around us were the women from our foundation. Dozens of them laughing, sharing stories, their faces full of a light that had been rekindled. As I blew out the candles on my cake, I looked at Arthur, my wonderful, kind husband, And I knew my life wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. Sometimes losing everything is the universe's way of clearing a path for what you truly deserve. It's a painful, brutal kind of housekeeping, but it leaves you with a clean, open space to build something beautiful and true. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I believe it's important for it to be heard. You are worthy. You are valuable. Never, ever let anyone make you feel disposable. And if you have a story of overcoming betrayal, of finding a second chance when all seemed lost, please share it in the comments below. Your story might be the light someone else needs to see in the darkness. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this.